Hi, welcome to this video on ethnicity and education for AQA A-level sociology. This is one of the possible questions that could come up as a 30 marker on the 2019 exams on May the 22nd. I am the sociology guy. You can follow me on Twitter at the sociology guy. You can also follow me on Instagram, the sociology guy, and you can also go onto my website, which is thesociologyguy.com. Okay, on there you'll find some free revision resources, mind maps, knowledge organisers, exam tips, checklists, model answers. And what we've been doing on there is we've been doing a 40-day challenge, and there's lots of model answers on there. I'll talk about that a little bit more later though. Just a quick disclaimer, I've got no knowledge of what is going to be on the exam papers. I am not the guy who has stolen the AS papers. I've got no knowledge of what is going to be on the A-level exams this year. This is basically very speculative. I've created the question, I've created the item. It's been created by me, not by AQA. It's based on question types that have not appeared on the specimen papers or on the AS or A-level exams up until June 2019. And the essay structure I'm going to use is just one way of answering the question. Other approaches may still get you full marks. This is just how I would answer the question. So I'm going to jump straight into the question. 30-mark questions. Question 4 on the paper always has an item attached to it. I always sort of like to say to students, have a look at the item and try and use as much as you can from the item. The reason they put the item there is to test one of your skills called application. It's very important that you use the item. It's there to help you. So let's have a quick look at it. Recent trends in educational achievement have shown an increase in the performance of minority ethnic groups at all levels in the education system. Students, particularly from those from a Chinese and Indian background, outperform their peers at GCSE and A-level, and some sociologists suggest this is due to a combination of internal and external factors. However, despite these improvements, there are still some ethnic groups that are disadvantaged in the education system, and sociologists suggest this is due to the structure of the school and attitudes in wider society. Okay, and the question is now going to ask you, apply material from item B and elsewhere, evaluate sociological explanations of differences in achievement rates of different ethnic groups. Okay, so there's a few things to pick out in this item. This is what I've picked out. Increasing the performance of minority ethnic groups at all levels. Okay, so we're not focusing on underachievement, overachievement. We're actually focusing on their improvement. However, we do still see some differences between those groups. They may all have been improving, but Chinese and Indian students, as we can see in the next line, are performing a lot better than, say, for example, white working class and African, Caribbean and Pakistani, Bangladeshi students. Okay, so that's in there as well, particularly those from a Chinese and Indian background. So if that's in there, it might hint that a good essay, what that will do is also talk about sort of like some of the positives, the ways in which sort of like some ethnic minority groups are overachieving. Some sociologists suggest this is a combination of internal and external factors. Okay, sometimes you get an essay that talks about the internal factors or in-school factors as being most important. Sometimes you'll get one saying wider society or external factors, or family or home factors. That's another couple of phrases they like to use. This one is talking about a combination of internal and external factors. This becomes key because when you come to do your conclusion, what I call a smart-ass paragraph at the very end, it's important to find one of the ways in which the internal is influenced by the external. In other words, something like labeling, where the label may happen inside of school, but it is caused by external factors such as your cultural background and in some instances the colour of your skin or your ethnic grouping. The next phrase, next paragraph. However, despite these improvements, there are still some ethnic groups that are disadvantaged in the education system. And sociologists suggest this is due to the structure of the school. So it's hinting we need to talk about internal factors and attitudes in wider society. So it's also hinting that maybe you want to talk about some external things. So a good essay here will have a balance of internal and external. Okay, so let's have a quick look at what we may be able to use in this essay. So you may have thought of some of these sort of like when you saw the question yourself, but the key things I've picked out here that you could potentially use are parental attitudes, family structure, the ethnocentric curriculum, changes to the curriculum, institutional racism, racism in wider society, subcultures, exclusions, the impacts of globalization on education, which is a bit of a tough one, and what I found is lots of students struggle with globalization in education, language codes, particularly of parents, less so of students, because the Swan report found that ethnic minority students tend to have the same level of English as native speakers. And labelling. Okay, labelling is a really good one because labelling is used. Labelling, we can talk about that for all of the three different groups, the three different social groups that we would talk about, based on gender, ethnicity, and social class later on, sort of like in other essays. So, quick introduction. Some differences about some people sort of like say, don't do an introduction, just jump straight in. Great, if you want to do that, that's fine. Me personally, I like to see an introduction and I like to write an introduction. And what I would do in the introduction is just basically show the examiner that what you're going to do is you understand the question, you understand the differences, you can use some of the information from the item, and you're explaining to the examiner, this is how I'm going to write it. Okay. I understand why people don't. A lot of the exams, a lot of the marking I see, people will just jump straight in. This is just a personal preference. You don't have to do it, but this is my introduction. As seen in item B, there has been an improvement in the performance of all minority ethnic groups in the education system. However, there remains a difference between the rates of achievement of some groups, such as Chinese and Indian, who perform well above average, and other groups, such as African, Caribbean and Pakistani, who remain slightly below the UK average. Sociologists suggest both internal and external factors when trying to explain these differences, such as cultural backgrounds, teacher and peer interactions, institutional racism and racism in wider society. Some reasons are neither exclusively internal nor external, but a combination of both factors. Me writing that, it's not going to get me any extra marks. What it is doing is it's putting into the mind of the examiner that I'm a student who knows what I'm talking about. I've explored a couple of these ideas, so sort of things like peer interactions, teacher interactions. I've explained to them this is what you should look out for in my essay. Takes about 5 minutes to do. I kind of understand why some people don't, but for me, I like to see it, and it gives me a little bit of time to think. The worst thing I see when I'm invigilating other exams is students who've been revising for weeks, months on end. They open a paper and the first thing they do is their pen touches the paper and they start writing. Because I can understand why people do it because of the adrenaline, and you rush and you see a question. I think writing an introduction gives you a little bit of time to think, a little bit of time to structure your thoughts, and it will help overall with the structure of your essay. So, moving on to the main body. Now, lots of different teachers teach you different things in terms of structure. Some use Peel, some use Petal, some use Perk. Me, I've got my own version, which is what I call AEAE. Okay, it's quite easy to remember because you want to get an E, not an A. You want to get an A, not an E. So apply, explain, analyze, evaluate. Okay, and I'm going to show you this as we go through the essay. Each one will be marked where I'm doing my application, where I'm doing my explanation, where I'm doing my analysis, and where I'm doing my evaluation. So I'm going to start with the first paragraph, and this is how it's laid out. As you can see on the left hand side of the screen, we've got application in red, explanation in yellow, analysis in green, and on the next slide you will have evaluation in blue. So I do this for each of the different paragraphs. I don't expect you to do that in an essay. I've just constructed it this way to show you where I am hitting those skills. So paragraph 1. One explanation for the differences in educational achievement of minority ethnic groups is cultural differences. Chinese and Indian students typically overachieve in education, and this is thought to be the result of their home backgrounds. Okay, in those 2 lines, what I've done is I've talked about cultural differences, and then I've explained what I mean by cultural differences, talking about home backgrounds of Chinese and Indian students. Okay, so I'm ticking a box here. What I've done is I've applied one idea. I've also applied it to a specific set of groups, Chinese and Indian students. Now what I need to do is explain how. How do the home backgrounds of Chinese and Indian students put them at an advantage in the education system? That is called analysis. So I'm using a study in here. Be careful when you're using a study, talk about what the impact of the study is rather than just describing it. If you describe it, it becomes description, AO1. If you talk about the impact of that study and what that study found and how we can apply it, it becomes AO3 analysis. So my analysis of this is Lupton's research into Asian families found that Asian families have an authoritarian hierarchy that is similar to that found in the education system, and this helps prepare these students for the demands of education. These students, as a result, are viewed more positively by teachers and given more attention. They are also supported more by families and in competition with positive role models, such as older siblings who have gone on to study at a higher level. Additionally, it is argued that many Indian families that migrate will have been viewed as middle class and therefore have cultural capital that can be used in the education system. Okay, my analysis there, as I've thrown quite a few concepts in there. As an examiner, I will probably be sitting there marking and underlining some of those key concepts. So talking about an authoritarian hierarchy. Okay, it's a really good sociological term to use. Cultural capital, another good term to use. Positive role models, very much a sociological concept as well. So it's packed with sociological concepts. It's explained why the family structure and the family backgrounds help Asian students. And now what I've got to do is I've got to evaluate it. Now, evaluation can take a number of different forms. You can either support it with some evidence, you could criticize it. So you could sort of say, this does not explain. You could offer an alternative viewpoint. You could talk about a limitation of the research that's been done, or you can put forward some evidence. Okay. So further evidence to support this comes from Driver and Ballard, who suggest that Asian families have a more pro-school ethos and a large support network to help their children perform well, particularly with their parents and elder siblings entering or having worked in the professional classes. What I've done there is this is what would be seen as a positive evaluation. I've made a judgment on it because what I've done is I've said that there are other pieces of evidence to support this idea. Paragraph 2, same format, application. An internal explanation for the educational achievement of minority ethnic groups is teacher interactions. It's good to explain that it's not like it's an internal explanation. I've explained an external application already. So there you go. I'm ticking a couple of the boxes that is in that item where it talks about internal and external. I've done both. It's teacher interactions. Okay. So now we've got to explain why teacher interactions have an impact. As already suggested, Chinese and Indian students benefit from positive interactions with teachers. However, the same cannot be said for Black and Pakistani students. Okay, so I've started to explain why teacher interactions have an impact. Now I'm going to analyse it. Throw in a study here, Gilborn and Udell. Gilborn and Udell argue that the teachers are far quicker to discipline Black pupils for perceived misdemeanours, as they hold racialised expectations of Black pupils as being anti-authority. This leads to Black pupils being disciplined more often and more likely to be temporarily and permanently excluded from schools, thus damaging their chances of achieving an education. Furthermore, teachers are less likely to interact with Pakistani pupils because of the ethnocentric views of teachers and the fear of mispronouncing their names or making racial judgments. And I'll just put in brackets right because that was a piece of research that suggested that. What you can see there, two studies. I've not gone into great depth about what Gilborn and Udell did. I've not gone into great depth about what Wright did. I've just mentioned them, but I've talked about the impact of their research. I've talked about what their research means, and I've talked about how it causes ethnic minority groups such as Black and Pakistani students to be demotivated in education. My evaluation, however, in recent years, pupils from African backgrounds have made huge strides in educational achievement and now outperforming white working class students, which may indicate a change in attitudes. I'm making a judgment there. However, these gains at GCSE and A level are not being replicated at university level, with many African students studying at less prestigious universities. Just this morning, I saw saw an article. I think it was in the Guardian that was suggesting that African students and Black Caribbean students are more likely to go to universities in their hometown because they fear that they won't fit in. That's on the back of something research that was suggested yesterday that more working class people are getting into Oxford and Cambridge, but that is a contemporary example, and that's me showing to examiners that I've got a little bit more knowledge than just secondary education, than just GCSEs and A-levels. I'm also showing that we've seen a movement, but it's still not good enough. So that's a judgment that we're making there. On to paragraph 3. A further explanation for the difference in educational achievement between ethnic groups is pupil and peer responses. Minority ethnic groups such as Black Caribbean are more likely to form anti-school subcultures in response to negative attention from teachers. Okay, I've explained what pupil and peer responses are, and I've explained why they respond. Now I've got to say how this works in practice. Again, throwing a study in here, Tony Sewell's study. Sewell suggested that teachers hold a negative stereotype of black boys as having a black machismo image. Consequently, some black boys react by rebelling in class and forming anti-school subcultures that were anti-school and anti-education. This is reinforced by external pressures to conform to an image of a ghetto superstar portrayed by anti-authority role models, according to Arno. This leads to them being more likely to be demotivated in education and clashing with teachers, leading to more exclusions for black pupils. However, this is my evaluation, Sewell also noted that the majority of black pupils hold pro-education values and conform to the ideas of educational achievement, much like in Fuller's study of African girls. This suggests that despite the best efforts to fit into education, there is an underlying reason for their comparative educational achievement. If we look at that paragraph, there are four kind of pieces of research in there. Well, three pieces of research. I've gone back to Sewell a second time. So that's packed full of sociological concepts and sociological ideas. There is a judgment that is made in there towards the end that, not all African Caribbean students end up becoming anti-school. The majority of them conform to pro-education and pro-school values. But we still like to sort of have these racialized expectations. Well, we don't like to have them, we still have these racialized expectations. What I would suggest is we look in the next paragraph. This leads on to what I'm going to talk about next, which is institutional racism. A fourth explanation of differences in educational achievement between ethnic groups is offered by institutional racism. Now I'm going to explain institutional racism refers to the way in which some groups are disadvantaged by the normal practices of an institution. Let's go into my analysis. I'll start with an example. An example is a really good way of showing if you can't quite find the words to talk about how a process works, give an example. It shows a deeper understanding without you having to get too technical. But I'll talk about this now. An example of institutional racism in the education system is suggested by Troiner and Williams, who suggest that the education system has an ethnocentric curriculum that focuses on the predominantly white middle-class culture of the elites. Ball refers to Little Englandism in the curriculum, harking back to an age of empire in history, literature and languages. This leaves minority ethnic students feeling alienated and demotivated in their studies and therefore unlikely to achieve as they are disengaged and isolated by the curriculum. In particular, the recent reforms to the history curriculum, which celebrate British imperial rule and relegate the study of African and Asian cultures to focus on negative aspects of their history, for example slavery, if at all. I think that's quite a tight paragraph. You've got a number of different concepts in there. You've got Troiner and Williams, one line. I've not described sort of like the process, what Troiner and Williams did. I've not described who they studied or anything like that because that's all descriptive. What I've discussed is the impact of their research. Again, Ball, I've discussed the impact of his research, what he suggested, what his conclusions were, and how it works in schools. And then I've thrown in a little bit of contemporary, the changes to the GCSE, the history curriculum in 2015. It was just coming for the GCSE exam for the first time last year, about sort of having to study 200 years of British history consecutively. And even then, if we do mention African culture, it tends to be in relation to slavery, and there's not too much mention of Asian culture at all in the history curriculum. Evaluating this, well, we look and we would sort of look at those groups who still overachieve despite this ethnocentric curriculum. So, however, some would argue that this has not affected Chinese and Indian students in the same way as Black and Pakistani students. In fact, Indian and Chinese students outperform white students whose history and literature they are learning. Therefore, there must be a further cultural explanation for these differences. Okay, there's the judgment. What I've done is I've put a limitation of this argument, this idea that the ethnocentric curriculum means that everybody from a non-white background is going to fail. Well, we've got Chinese and Indian students outperforming white students, and they are learning about a completely different culture. So that's where we would see a limitation of that. From institutional racism, I'll lead into my final paragraph, which is an external factor, and we look at racism in wider society. So this is offered by theorists that suggest that the most important factor in educational achievement of different ethnic groups in racism is racism in wider society. Racism in wider society refers to the disadvantages and prejudices that people of minority ethnic groups face in wider society, such as employment, legislation, and attitudes from the general public. Now I'm going to put a bit of research in again. Rex suggests that racism in wider society leads to social and economic exclusion for minority ethnic groups, while Noon highlighted the prejudice faced by Asian applicants for employment. The unemployment rate, particularly for black males, is significantly higher than the national average, and recent claims have suggested that black males are significantly more likely to be stopped and searched on suspicion of carrying drugs or weapons. This acts as a deterrent to work hard, as many young black males feel rejected by the society they are part of and therefore not motivated to achieve. So what I've got is I've got some older research from Rex and from Noon about sort of like racism in general society. I've also thrown in some more contemporary things, so unemployment rate for black males, and also recently it's been claimed by Diana that black teenagers are 40 times more likely to be stopped and searched. A lot of our textbooks sort of like would suggest it's around about 7 or 8 times, but obviously with the current moral panic about knife crime, particularly in London, then are we now totally targeting young black males because we perceive them to be criminal in some way? Are they being labelled as criminal, and are they being labelled as criminal to divert from all of the other problems that are happening in society? Our evaluation. This can be further validated by the explanation that Chinese and Indians are more resistant to racism and therefore more likely to achieve. However, some would argue that this resistance to racism may be drawn from enhanced future prospects due to positive stereotyping of the ethnic group as being high achievers. Further evidence to support racism and wider society impacting on in-school behaviours can be drawn from the lower number of black and Pakistani professors in higher education, meaning that racism in wider society impacts on the pupils' aspirations in education. So, again, that's a nice little bit of evaluation that shows you've got quite sophisticated knowledge of sociology, talking about sort of like how we don't see black and Pakistani professors in university. We don't see highly educated black and Pakistanis people being presented in the media. I mean, of course, there are some sort of like there are some sort of like exceptions to that, but generally speaking, sort of like black and Pakistani young males don't necessarily have positive role models, and as a consequence, they're not going to want to achieve in the education system. We come to the last paragraph, and this is where I sort of like say what you should try and do is be a smart ass, or what we'll say to make it a little bit cleaner. This is an essay paragraph. This is where you have the opportunity to show the examiner your real knowledge of sociology. You know how these different concepts interact with one another. Some people call it a mic drop moment, where sort of like you are leaving the essay and you're sort of like saying, yeah, this is my idea, boom, right? I like to call it a smart arse paragraph just because students tend to remember it because I'm saying the word arse. So, my conclusion. Whilst it can be argued that progress has been made in terms of achievement of all minority ethnic groups, it appears that the intersectionality of those students in the lower social classes, the male gender, and in the minority ethnic groups not stereotypically seen as bright remains. Working class black and Pakistani males seem to suffer the same fate as their working class white counterparts. The reasons behind this appear to be a mixture of society's beliefs in these groups to be troublemakers, which is then passed on into the classroom via interactions with teachers and other educational professionals. As an example, when we look at these papers, conclusions generally tend to be one of the weaker things, but I think a conclusion is a good way of just leaving your mark on the examiner's mind by sort of like saying, right, look, I'm an 18-year-old, I've been studying this subject for 2 years, but I can produce a paragraph like this because I understand the topic. Now, you can't get into the top bands without a conclusion, or, well, you can, but you have to do lots of mini conclusions as you go through the essay. Making a concluding paragraph, this is a sign that sort of like, you know, you're saying to the examiner, look, give me that 30 marks, give me the 28, give me the 29, give me 30. So I think it's really useful to have a conclusion. It's always worth sort of like having one or two little things that for each of those questions. So for ethnicity, for social class, for gender, having one or two big statements to make at the end of an essay, so that you can wow the examiner. You can show them that you are a smartass. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this video. There are other videos that I'm going to be doing sort of like over the next few weeks in the lead up to the exams. I'm concentrating on the education and theory and methods ones very much early on, because obviously that's the first exam on the 22nd of May. Before the 4th of June, I'll be looking at paper 2 essays and then focusing on crime and theory and methods again. So some of the other videos, some of the things I think that may come up this year, or certainly that you need to have in your locker to be able to answer a question on childhood. Childhood could potentially be a 20 marker. Modernity versus post-modernity is one that scares a lot of students, but I actually think it's a really quite nice, easy essay to write. Sociology and social policy, again, a couple of questions there that sort of like can be quite problematic. A question that can be problematic for students. Contribution of feminism and functionalism to our understanding of society. Of course, you could get Marxism or you could get interactionism as well, but they have appeared on the spec papers. So if you've not seen the spec papers, you've not practiced those, I'm putting forward some feminist and functionalism ones which haven't been on the spec papers. Social action versus structural theory is another one I think students get quite tied down by. Aid versus trade and the influence of new media on society. I don't do beliefs in society videos, mainly because I don't teach beliefs in society, but I do teach global development, and I do teach media, and I have taught global development. So they are the ones that I will look at this year. I've also got a whole range of other videos from last year's exam available sort of like on the YouTube site. And we've been doing a 40-day challenge over the last 40 days. What I've been doing, over the 40 days, between the 40 days between now and paper one, what I've done is I've done a 10-mark question every day. Most of them have been on theory and methods, some education, some crime. I collaborated with Kate Flatley, who is another YouTuber who does sociology, on a beliefs one. I've done some media, I've done some global development. The model answers are available to download from the website. I set the challenge every day. I set a 10 marker every day, and then 24 hours later we'll upload a model answer for you, so that you can have a look at some of the different question types, some that you may have not seen on past papers before. Have a go at them and then compare your answer to mine. Okay, thank you very much for watching. I'm the sociology guy. You can sort of like contact me through sort of like all the various different forms of media, and hopefully I will hopefully sort of like you'll tune into one of my videos again. Goodbye.